They say a man's worth shows in what he builds. I spent 36 years believing that was the whole truth. Then I sat at a dinner table in downtown Raleigh while my son introduced me to his colleagues as a handyman, and I understood that the saying was only half right. The building matters, but so does knowing who actually owns it. My name is Raymond Aldrich. I was 64 years old the night I decided to say nothing. The Dacian Avenue porch in the Mordecai neighborhood made a particular sound in the early morning. A low creak from the second board on the left, the one I had never gotten around to replacing, because Margaret always said she liked knowing when I was up. At 5:40 on a March morning, a week before all of this began, I was sitting with my coffee in the dark, and the board made that sound under my own weight, and I thought about how much of a life is held in the things nobody else would notice. Phillip had no idea what I had already decided the night his dinner invitation arrived. Welcome back to Dad's True Revenge, the quiet corner of the internet where accounts get settled. If you've ever been the strong one nobody noticed, this story is for you. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're going to love it here. My son Phillip was 38 years old when Hargrove and Denning LLP made him a junior partner. He called me on a Sunday to tell me, and his voice had the particular brightness of a man who had been waiting a long time to say those words out loud. I told him I was proud of him because he had worked for it. I knew what working for something looked like. I had spent 36 years as a construction supervisor and site manager for Aldrich & Sons, a name I had kept even after the Sons part was just me, because my father had put on the first set of letterhead and it felt wrong to change it. I started as a laborer at 22, carrying rebar and pouring footings on summer mornings. So hot the concrete, set wrong if you blinked. By the time I was 31, I was running crews. By 40, I was managing 4 job sites simultaneously, driving between them in a truck that had 240,000 miles on it because a new one felt like money I hadn't earned yet. Margaret used to say I was the only man she knew who could calculate a load-bearing estimate in his head while making coffee. She said it like it was a complaint. It wasn't. She passed 11 years before the story takes place. On a February morning, so cold the pipes in the upstairs bathroom had frozen overnight. Ovarian cancer. Diagnosed late, gone faster than the doctors had predicted. I sat in the parking lot of Wake Medical for 45 minutes after they told me. And then I drove home and made sure the pipes thawed before anything else cracked. That is the kind of man I am. I fix what is in front of me. What nobody at Hargrove and Denning knew, what Phillip had apparently never mentioned, was that the fixing had not stayed residential. In November of 1987, on the 9th, I had taken $31,000 out of the savings account I had been building since I was 25 and purchased a small commercial property on Wilmington Street in downtown Raleigh. The seller was an older man named Doyle who was moving his family to Asheville and wanted clean clothes. We shook hands on a Wednesday. I signed the paperwork at a folding table in his office. The deed went into a manila folder that I labeled by hand and put in the filing cabinet beside my father's old desk, where it stayed. That folder was the beginning of something I never named out loud. Over the next 18 years, I added 3 more properties, none of them flashy. A converted warehouse space on Blunt Street, a 2-unit street-level commercial property on Person Street that I renovated over 2 summers by myself, working nights and Saturdays while still running the construction business. A 4th building on Dawson Street that I bought at a county auction in 2002 for $78,400, a number that still struck me as slightly unreal because I had been patient and nobody else in the room had done their homework. I managed the properties the way I managed everything. Personally, I drove to each one every Saturday morning, without exception for 22 years. I kept the books by hand in a green ledger until 2003, when Sandra Pruitt at the Wake County Register of Deeds suggested I switch to a system that would generate reports automatically. I did not switch. I liked the ledger. It felt honest. I paid Phillip's law school tuition, $147,000 over 3 years, drawn from rental income, without attaching conditions to it. I co-signed the lease on the apartment he and Colette took in Cameron Village when he passed the bar. I drove him to the Durham bus station every Sunday night his first year of school because he didn't have a car that made the trip reliably, and I never once mentioned the drive on the way home, which took 45 minutes each way on a good night. when Phillip and Colette's furnace failed in February of 2018. I drove over at 6 a.m. with my tools and had it running before Colette woke up. None of that is complaint. That is just what the record shows. I tell you this because by March of this year, I had 4 commercial properties in downtown Raleigh unencumbered, generating enough annual income that I had not needed to touch my retirement savings in 6 years. I had a filing cabinet with a manila folder in it. I had a porch with a loose board. And I had a son who was a junior partner at a law firm who had, at some point, decided that the clearest path to belonging in that world was to make sure the people in it did not look too closely at where he came from. The voicemail arrived on March 3rd. Dad, hey, it's Phillip. So, Colette and I are doing a dinner thing. Kind of an informal partners night, 7-ish, the place on Fayetteville Street. We'd love you to come. Colette thinks it would be good. Just, come as you are. Don't overthink the outfit. He laughed at the end of that. A small laugh, the kind that does most of its work in the space around it. I played it twice. Something in my throat tightened on the second listen. I called him back. I said I would be there. The restaurant on Fayetteville Street was called Calder's, linen tablecloths, the kind of menu that doesn't list prices, and a lighting level that suggested the management believed dim rooms made people feel important. I arrived at 7:12 p.m. in a clean blue Oxford shirt and the charcoal pants Margaret had picked out for me 11 Christmases ago. They still fit. My hands were clean. My shoes were shined. Phillip met me at the door. He looked at my shirt for just a half-second longer than he needed to. Then he smiled and put a hand on my shoulder and steered me toward the table where 3 other couples were already seated. Everybody, he said, this is my dad, Raymond. He runs a construction operation out of Mordecai, very blue collar, salt of the earth, right, Dad? Fix it type. He said it with a warmth that was designed to sound like pride. We're very different, Colette always says, but you know how fathers and sons are. I nodded once. Martin Gould was at the end of the table. Senior partner, Hargrove and Denning, a man in his early 60s with particular stillness of someone who spent his days in rooms where words cost money. He reached across and shook my hand. His grip was firm. He looked at me the way men like him look at men like me. The quick assessment that places you in a category and then moves on. What kind of construction? He said. Commercial, mostly. I said. Phillip said, Dad's being modest. He mostly does repairs and site oversight now, right, Dad? More of a hands-on kind of role. My chest did something it hadn't done in years. I said, something like that. Colette was seated to Phillip's left. She was wearing a dark green dress and had her hair up, and she had the energy of someone who had planned this evening carefully. When the introductions made it to the other partners, a man named Devin Walsh and his wife, a woman named Cressida, and a younger associate named Tyler Park, Colette touched Phillip's arm and said, We're so glad Raymond could come. He's very proud of Phillip, I know. She said it about me, not to me. My stomach dropped. I kept my face neutral. The conversation moved the way dinner conversations do when everyone at the table is performing something. They talked about a case. They talked about a restaurant in Durham. They talked about real estate, which I noticed. Devin Walsh said, The commercial market downtown is wild right now. Our building. Do you know who owns our building? He said it to the table, the way someone asks a question they already know the answer to. We have never once seen the landlord. Our property manager's been the same woman for 12 years. It's like the guy doesn't exist. Colette said, Some old ghost we've never met, apparently. Martin thinks he's older, out of the market. Probably doesn't even know what the space is worth now. I kept my face neutral. The bread arrived. The appetizers arrived. Phillip refilled his wine and told a story about his first deposition, and the table laughed, and I ate my bread and watched the room. At 9:03 p.m., Martin Gould said, Raymond, what was the address on that Wilmington Street property you were mentioning? I had not been mentioning any property. I had said almost nothing for the past 90 minutes. I didn't answer. Colette filled the silence. Raymond's more of a neighborhood guy, Martin. Local repairs, that kind of thing. He wouldn't have much overlap with the downtown commercial space. She smiled at me when she said it. A warm smile, the kind that does damage quietly. Something in me went quiet. The check came at 11:04 p.m. I shook hands with Martin Gould and Devin Walsh. I told Phillip the food was good. I drove home on Fayetteville Street with the radio off. I was parked in my own driveway on Dacian Avenue at 11:47 p.m. I sat there for 11 minutes before I went inside. The porch board made it sound under my weight. I went to the filing cabinet and put my hand on the manila folder and left it there for a while without opening it. Then I went to bed. I had a phone call to make in the morning. Howard Kessler had been my property attorney for 19 years. His office was on Hillsborough Street, third floor, a space he'd occupied since the Clinton administration. I had found him through a referral from a tile supplier in 1999, who said Howard was the kind of lawyer who read everything twice and never charged for the second read. That had proved accurate. I called him at 9:42 a.m. the Thursday after the dinner. Howard, I said, I need current deed abstracts on all 4 properties. Full ownership verification, unencumbered status, current assessed value. And I need to know what the Fayetteville Street building at 214 Fayetteville, the one with Hargrove and Denning on the second floor, what that deed shows for ownership. There was a pause. Raymond, he said, that's one of yours. I said, I know. The Tuesday after Easter, I was in the queue at the Wake County Register of Deeds on New Bern Avenue at 6:15 a.m. Sandra Pruitt processed my document request herself when she came on at 7. She had helped me with records before. She knew how I worked. She pulled the abstracts without comment, handed me the folder across the counter, and said, You want copies certified? I said I did. I drove home with the certified copies on the passenger seat. The Blunt Street building, the Person Street property, the Dawson Street warehouse, and 214 Fayetteville Street, Raleigh, North Carolina, assessed at a number that had not appeared anywhere in Colette's sentence about old ghosts. I sat at the kitchen table on Dacian Avenue and organized the documents the way my father had taught me. Oldest first, 1 rubber band around the outside, the label in the upper right corner in black ink. I refinanced the Blunt Street building in 2009 to keep 3 small tenants from losing their leases when the market dropped. I had not told anyone that. I had just done it. I thought about that while I organized the papers. I thought about Phillip on the phone saying, Come as you are. I thought about the word ghost. My shoulders went tight. I put the folder on the corner of the desk and did not touch it again that day. Phillip called on a Saturday at 4:17 p.m. Colette had apparently told him the dinner was a success. He seemed easy, relaxed, pleased with how things had gone. He said Martin had commented that I seemed like a real person, which I understood was meant as a compliment. I think it went well, Phillip said. Colette thinks you might have been a little quiet, but you know how she reads things. I kept my voice level. The dinner was fine, I said. We're thinking of doing another one. Smaller, maybe. Just the partners. A few clients. We'd love to have you there. I'll come, I said. There was a small silence. Then he said, Dad, you know you can dress it up a little, right? Colette has some ideas about, I don't know, she thinks maybe. Phillip, I said, I'll come. He said, Okay, great. And there was something in his voice that settled, the way a man's voice settles when he decides not to say the rest of what he was going to say. I sat with that. The second dinner was on a Friday in April. Same restaurant. Martin Gould was there again and Devin Walsh, and 2 clients I had not met, a man named Bear who was involved in commercial development, and his associate, a woman named Priya Anand, who asked good questions and listened to the answers. I wore the same blue shirt. I polished the same shoes. Colette had seated me at the far end of the table, next to Devin's wife. Phillip was at the center. I watched him work the room. He was good at it. He had learned to make people feel seen, which is not nothing. I had not taught him that. He had figured it out himself, which I respected more than I could explain. The conversation moved toward real estate again, the way it had before. Barrett was talking about a building on Fayetteville Street he had been trying to acquire for a client for 18 months. The owner's a ghost, he said. We've sent 3 letters through the property management company. No response. My throat went dry. I took a sip of water. Martin Gould said, Funny, Devin, didn't you say the same thing about our building? Devin said, Same address? Barrett said, 214 Fayetteville. Martin Gould set his fork down. He looked at Devin. Then he looked slowly down the table toward me. He said, "Raymond, what did you say your address was on that Wilmington Street property?" I paused. The table went quiet. Not completely. There was still the sound of the room, the other conversations, the particular ambient murmur of a restaurant that thinks the right lighting makes you feel important. But at our table, at that particular end of the conversation, it went quiet. I said, "I didn't say." Martin Gould had been a senior partner for long enough that he knew what a man looked like when he knew exactly what he was about to say. He looked at me that way now. He said, "Do you have any connection to the Fayetteville Street building?" For a moment, nothing. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. I had put the folder there before I left Dacian Avenue. The rubber band was still on it. I set it on the tablecloth. Phillip's eyes went to the folder. His face went still in a way I had not seen before. Not blank, but very carefully arranged, the way a man's face arranges itself when his mind is moving faster than his body. I slid the folder to Martin Gould. He opened it. He looked at the cover page. He looked at the deed. He turned one page and then another. He said, "You're the owner of record." I said, "Since 1987, all 4 properties. The Fayetteville Street building transferred to the current configuration in 2004. Barrett said, "For properties?" I said, "Yes." Martin Gould put the folder down. He looked at me. Something shifted in his expression. The category he had put me in 2 weeks ago reorganized itself into something he hadn't accounted for. He said, "You said commercial construction." I said, "I did." Colette's face had gone pale in the way faces go pale when the temperature of a room changes faster than the body can catch up. She looked at Phillip. Phillip was looking at the folder. He picked it up. He turned the cover page. He looked at the deed. He said nothing for a long time. I kept my hands folded on the tablecloth. I did not explain. I did not say anything about 2 dinners of introductions, or the word ghost, or the suggestion about my outfit. I did not say any of it. He looked up. His eyes were the same eyes he had had at 8 years old. The morning Margaret and I told him we were proud of him for the first time, he'd said something was too hard, and then done it anyway. He said, "Dad." I said, "The food's good here." Martin Gould laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that comes out before a man decides whether to let it. He reached across the table and shook my hand a second time, and this time the grip was different. The rest of the dinner finished the way dinners finish. Barrett asked if I was open to a conversation about the Fayetteville Street building, and I said I would have Howard Kessler contact him. Priya Anand asked how I'd gotten into commercial property, and I told her about Doyle and the $31,000 and the folding table, and she listened the way people listen when they are genuinely interested. Colette did not say very much for the remainder of the evening. Phillip drove me to my car at 10:04 p.m. We stood on Fayetteville Street with the building above us. He looked up at it for a moment. Then he looked at me. He said, "Why didn't you tell me?" I thought about that. I thought about 36 years of Saturday mornings and a green ledger and a boy in a bus station doorway on a Sunday night. I said, "You didn't ask." He nodded. He didn't say anything else. I drove home. In the months after that dinner, things change the way things change when the truth finally occupies the space it was always supposed to occupy. Phillip called Howard Kessler directly 2 weeks later. Not about the properties, but about setting up a formal record of the tuition contributions, which he said he had been meaning to do for years. I do not know if that is true. I chose to believe it. Martin Gould and I had coffee on a Wednesday in May. He asked about the 1987 purchase, and I told him about my father and the ledger and what it felt like to sign a deed on a folding table when you are 29 years old and not sure you've done the math right. He said it was the best origin story he had heard in 30 years of law. I told him I hadn't thought of it as a story. He said that was exactly why it was a good one. Barrett's client made an offer on the Fayetteville Street building in June. I thanked him and declined. Colette called me on a Thursday in July. At 8:22 a.m., she said she wanted to apologize, and she did, in the careful way people apologize when they are also explaining. I listened. I thanked her. I did not tell her it was fine, because it wasn't entirely. But I also didn't tell her it was unforgiven, because it wasn't that either. The porch board on Dacian Avenue still makes it sound every morning at 5:40 when I go out for my coffee. I have thought about replacing it every year since Margaret died. I have not replaced it. I think I understand now that I am not going to. Raymond Aldrich, 64 years old, and the owner of record. Their dinner table. Their assessment. My folder. If you were at that table the night Phillip introduced his father as a handyman, and that folder came out, did they deserve to know who they were looking at, or did the silence say everything that needed saying? Tell me in the comments. And if you like this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being a part of this sphere.